One of those elected and placed into the Marin Women's Hall of Fame for 1990 is Caroline S. Livermore. Now, if you live in or around Marin County or any place in the Bay Area, or I see California, or maybe even further, you certainly know that name, because this woman has done more to make and keep Marin County the way it is, the way we love it in beauty, than anybody else. And I'm saying that without any fear of being questioned. We're going to be talking with Mrs. Livermore's son, Putnam. Where was she born? Where did she come from?
Well, she was born in Galveston, Texas, down on the Gulf. It's just down the coast from Houston in about 1885. And married my father, who was from San Francisco, in about 1910.
Were they married in Texas? How did
in
they
Texas, right down the, yes, on the island there.
And came immediately to Marin, or how did they get here?
No, she moved to San Francisco, but they liked Marin a lot. And so about 1930, they decided to move here. So they moved to Ross. And it was about before the bridge was built, and all the controversy was going on about whether to build the Golden Gate Bridge. Of course, that took years of litigation. And so she and some remarkable women, and there were men involved too, but principally a group of women, decided that they should prepare for the influx of people from the Golden Gate Bridge, and so they started working on conservation.
What was the quality in Caroline Livermore that led to that?
Well, I think she had vision. I think her parents in Galveston were community leaders. They helped to build the seawall around Galveston, beautify Galveston and the main streets, and were always involved in civic things. So she saw this from the time she was a little girl. They had a big flood there in 1900, and it was very damaging to the city. And my grandfather helped build the seawall, and my grandmother was always interested in planting oleanders on the main street. So this was way, way, way before conservation or Earth Day. Yeah.
Why did she start her conservation work?
Well, you asked me about her qualities too, and I think she had a public service motivation from her parents. She had vision. She was always looking at what's the next thing coming, like the building of the bridge, and she had tremendous faith. I remember one of her favorite sayings was some old poem or saying, if you never start till you know the way, you'll never stir till Judgment Day.
I love it.
And then she said, yeah, that was my thought. I'd think of what was needed, and I'd start it, and other people would come in and help. And then she had a lot of persistence, too. I remember one of the things she tried to do would be to get land for parks, and so she went after the PG&E for something, and later on the president of PG&E talked to someone. We heard this roundabout that he said, well, if Mrs. Livermore asks you for anything, just say yes right away, because she'll get it sooner or later.
And so you might as not as, you know,
save yourself a lot of time.
That.
So she had persistence, and then she loved the struggle, you know, the working and getting the votes and so forth.
The getting the votes, amplify on that a little bit, because she worked really in the system, in the political system.
Oh, yes. Well, these were the early days, you know, before they had any planning commission, no planning code, no billboard ordinance, and the supervisors were just beginning, or did during this period, begin to realize that the conservation was a political issue.
Now we're talking about the 1930s.
1930s, right,
Okay.
and 1940s. And I was just a little kid running around the house, and so I can remember her on the phone very well, you know, talking to these other ladies and saying, oh, now, Verna, you go over to the Board of Supervisors, because we've got to get that vote, or you go up to Sacramento. So it was political. You know, it was getting the votes to get the parks, and as I say, getting the first planning director hired, and these were new concepts then. You know, I think this was one of the first counties in the state that had a planning commission, and it was the first billboard ordinance. Matter of fact, one of my brothers who was out of state was at a meeting once, and he was asked, where you come from? And he said, Marin County. Oh, he said, God, that's a terrible county. And this fellow was in the billboard business, and John said, well, why is that? Well, he said, there's some woman down there that's just crazy. You know, she's, this Mrs. Livermore is her name, and she's getting this billboard ordinance done. And John said, well, that crazy woman is my mother.
It was her idea to have a planning commission. What did she go to? Where did she go? How did she do this?
Well,
point her friends or say, hey, let's...
No, I should mention other women, too. There was Helen Van Pelt, was a great pioneer in planning, Mary Summers Gilkey, Cepha Evers, Verna Dunshee, Portia Forbes. These people started the Marin Conservation League. And I remember when she was old, why, someone once said, well, Ms. Livermore, you should come over to the supervisor. We're having a meeting over there. And she was over 80 then. And she said, oh, no, I don't get in those fights anymore. You know, I'm too old. And they said, well, no, we don't want you to get in the fight. You know, just come over and put on your best dress and your hat, because if we find if you sit in the front row, the supervisors vote better. One of the first zoning ordinances in the United States, and she and these people, not just my mother, but she was sort of the ringleader. They got the first zoning ordinance, the first planning department under the zoning ordinance, the first billboard ordinance, and the first planning director.
Incredible.
And then in addition, I've got some notes here.
Please.
These women got the Tamales Bay Park, Jepson Park, Samuel...
Where's Jepson Park?
Jepson Park's out in Tamales Bay.
Oh, okay.
Shell Beach, Samuel P. Taylor Park, St. Hilary's Church, the whole Richardson Bay Sanctuary. We worked on Mount Tamalpais Park, Angel Island, Tiburon Net Station, Point Reyes Seashore, and then Mother started the Marin Art and Garden Center.
You see, it's simple. You just list off these things that are such an important part of all of our lives.
That's right.
But your mother was instrumental in the Stinson Beach State Park.
Yes, she was, but I think not as instrumental as in some of these other ones. But she did. Yes, she was instrumental along with other people in that too.
But she
yes.
was, as you've used this phrase, she was a ringleader.
She was a nonpartisan conservation politician.
Okay. Now, what about the Marin Art and Garden Center? Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, that belonged to the Kittle family. They were an old Ross family, and she went to the Kittles, and she knew them. They're neighbors, and she said, I would like to buy it and then make a art and garden center. And Mr. Kittle was interested. Some of the other people in Ross were not interested in that because they liked the Kittle house the way it was. That's it's understandable. They're used to that. So the art and garden center was quite a radical thought. So they bought the land, and then they had the first fair there, and it rained. Nobody came. And the next year they tried it again in September. It rained again. And
the long view.
And so she was knocked out again. And so then the third time they figured, well, we'll do it in July. And that was it. And from then on, it was a tremendous success. And I think it was after a few that it became the county fair for a while before the county fair moved out there.
Let's talk about Richardson Bay for a moment.
Oh, yeah. Well, Richardson Bay was owned by the Utah, I guess it was called Utah Construction Company. I think it was called that. And they owned all the property, if you can visualize it, between Strawberry Point and Belvedere. So she went to the National Audubon Society, and they gave her $25,000. She also founded the Marin Audubon Society.
Incidentally, she started the Marin County Audubon Society.
Yes. Well, she was one of the ones. She was one of the ones. So then she got $25,000, and she went to the Board of Supervisors, who by then were getting to be her pals. And they were onto this. This was a good thing for the county. They were far-sighted men at that time. And they said, okay, if the Audubon Society will put in $25,000, we'll put in $25,000. And then she went to the Belvedere and said, now you should put in $50,000 because you're going to get the benefit of this open space instead of having Utah Construction fill the whole area in with like Venice, with canals and or streets and or canals. I don't know whether they were going to have boats in there, but so and as I described that meeting, they did. I think that was agreed to that. That was the first, I believe, one of the first, if not the first, open space bond issues in the state. And they passed that $50,000, and citizens of Belvedere went door to door and passed that. So that was $100,000. Then she went to the highway department and said, look, now someday you're going to have to expand that highway out to Belvedere, and we'll sell you a strip along the shore, and you put up $100,000. So they did. So there was the $200,000.
We're all familiar, if you ever drive there, and most people do, on the right is the little yellow house, which is the Lyford house. How did that get there, and who was the goat lady that we hear about who owned, you know, who lived there, or? Yeah,
well, the Lyford house was moved across from Strawberry Point.
It was barged over?
It was barged by the Crowley family. They have the tug, and they're good, very good conservation family.
Yes.
Mr. Tom Crowley, Sr. and Jr. both. So the Lyford was a doctor, and his house was over on the Strawberry Point. So the Crowleys got one of their tugs or barges, and they barged it over, and then a house mover jacked it up the hill to that Audubon Center. And the goat lady was Rose DeFont Verrill was her name, and she was a young Portuguese woman that was raised, can you believe it, when the Tiburon Peninsula was just a cattle ranch. Nothing there, and she would roam those hills as a young woman, and she was in love with Reed, a fellow called Reed, who owned that whole area. And they never married, but he gave her that little spot there, which is where the Audubon Center is. She got to be pals with my mother, you know, and so they worked out an agreement with the Marin Conservation League where she would deed this land to the Marin Conservation League, and in return for a life estate and payments, so much a month, and her medical expenses were taken care of.
So it was a lifetime pension.
That's right.
And looking out for her.
And then the Audubon Society took this over. So then you had the combination, you see there, of the Lyford house and this open Richardson Bay and the land all put together.
How about Angel Island and Mount Tamalpais? These two places would be so different. We would be passing houses all the way up Mount Tamalpais.
Yeah. Well, that's right. Well, again, it's a part of a puzzle. The water district was part of this too, because they own a lot of land. My father helped found that. He was on the first board, and he was a hydraulic engineer and helped incorporate it. And so that preserved a lot of land. And again, the Kents, Tom Kent was on the first board and worked for a lot of years in the water district.
Okay, let's talk about Angel Island.
She decided that something should be done, because this time it was getting to the 40s almost. This was after the war, and her idea is the war is over, you know, you don't need this place anymore. So that didn't go over too well with the Army. But finally, they kept after it, and she started a new Angel Island Foundation. And some of the same people, the Marin Conservation League people, were in on it. And she went over to had a lot of gumption. She went to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors and she said, you should take over this island, make a park out of it. And they didn't want, imagine they turned it down. So she went to I don't know which she went to first. She went to the Marin Board of Supervisors and said, well, you got to make a park out of this. And they didn't want to. I think it was the maintenance. It was so big, and they just didn't want to do it. Or in some manner, the government was going to auction it off so that the island would be up for private development. And so that they did, they got it declared a state historical site, Aubrey Neesham did. And that put a sort of a hold on it for a year while they could collect their ideas. Then they checked the law further and found out if they could put a deposit up on the island, that they could hold it a little longer to have it declared more in the state's interest to be a park. And it's hard to believe, but she and I guess 4 other people put up $7,000. And
Angel Island? For
Angel Island, yeah, to hold it. And that's the only money I think that I remember that was a lot of money those days. In fact, she came to me and she said, my share of this is $2,000. Do you think Dad's going to get sore at me for this? And I said, no, I don't think so. I think good idea. And she was a little worried, but he was good. You know, he's a conservationist too.
Yeah.
Yes, and so he thought that was okay. But so they lost their money, but they saved the island. Their final victory was to get the Army to give up the Nike missiles.
Well, isn't that, let's see, that was right on the very top.
That's right.
Isn't that now named for your mother?
Yes.
Yes.
That was Aubrey Neesham's idea, you know, the historian. So he
Caroline?
got it. It's called Mount Livermore.
Mount Livermore.
Yeah,
okay, Mount Livermore. Would you say that was the highlight of the things she did was Angel Island? Did she feel that way?
Well,
keeping
perhaps. I think she once said, you know, if there's ever a memorial to me, why, just put a simple bench up there, you know, because nothing fancy, you know, just a place for people to sit.
What other things did your mother do, Caroline S. Livermore, do?
Well, she was very, before she got into conservation, when she came over here and saw the need when the Golden Gate Bridge was in, she was very active in the church. And she was one of the she worked very hard for the construction of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. She really worked hard at that. In fact, she was the first woman ever to be on the standing committee of the Episcopal Church. She had that way. She got along all right with the men, you know. And she was very pragmatic, and so she worked at that. And I remember she was always going to the church convention trying to get the votes for the women.
Votes for the women?
In the diocese, you know,
yes.
they'd go into the whatever House of Delegates, and
right.
the women didn't have the vote. And so she was always sort of sore about that. She'd come back, and I'd say, well, how close are you now? And she'd say, well, we're getting there. Maybe a few more conventions, we'll have the vote.
Did she look at that, for instance, and many of the other things she did as an encouragement of women doing things? I want to get, you see,
oh, yes.
She would say, women need to be stronger in these things, or was it,
well,
was she a feminist ahead of the time when we use that word?
She was a sort of a persistent feminist, but not on stage, not yelling about it. You know, she was just very persistent to the women who were going to do this, do that. She was one of the founders of Planned Parenthood in San Francisco.
See?
And I remember one night she came home and said that she'd been to a speech with Margaret Sanger had spoken, and Dad said, my gosh, didn't she just get put in jail for talking about birth control? And Mother said, well, that's right, but I believe in that. So that, you know, people argue about that, but that was her view. So.
Yes.
So another thing she did, she was co-chairman of the Frank Lloyd Wright
The Civic Center?
Civic Center. She and
Vera Schultz had a lot to do.
Vera Schultz and Peter Bear. Peter Bear, and I remember as part of my lesson in vote counting, Peter Bear was over at the registrar, voter registrar that night, and we were counting votes and had to get 2/3. So it just barely made it. So again, a lot of people were against that Civic Center, you know, and they thought Frank Lloyd Wright was a communist, and of course he was a very tactless person. You know, he would come in and
storm around.
Well, he'd tell people off, and he said a lot of very tactless things when he came into the county, and irritated a lot of people. And it was a sort of an unusual building at the time.
Yeah, still is, but we could, you know, but it's there and we love it. It's a part of Marin County. I would like very much to talk about your mother's influence on you. And now you're one of 5 boys.
5 boys.
Where do you come in the spectrum?
Well, I'm the 4th son.
Name them for us.
Well, Norman is the oldest.
All right, that's Junior, I suppose.
Norman B. Livermore, Jr.
Right,
yes.
okay.
And George is the next son, and John, and I'm Putnam, and Bob is the youngest.
All right.
Robert.
You're born over enough of a sphere of time that you watched your mother in these various stages of her work.
Oh, yeah.
Where did you come in? Let's see now. You used to come. You were here when the Golden Gate Bridge was built. Marin County was vastly different.
Oh, yes. You know, I remember Dad, because he used to come over here all the time before then. They had a summer house in Ross.
Right.
And he said he could remember you could gallop on horseback all the way from Sausalito to Fairfax, and it was open.
You remember that?
I can't remember that.
No, but you do remember.
I can remember.
Of course you do.
Sure, I don't remember when it was that open, but I do remember the county when I was 6 years old. It was totally different.
And you were listening to your mother on the.
I was.
Yeah.
You know, as I say, there was no television, and these were very vivid characters to me.
I think you said earlier that you didn't have Sesame Street, but you had your mother on the telephone.
I had these wonderful characters, and I learned, you know, I remember I've learned since too, and you know, if you have the votes, then you get the supervisors to vote. If you don't have the votes, then you talk on the phone until you get the votes.
Until you get the votes.
So that's a very early lesson.
As a mother, what was she like? As a, you know, you listened in on her
Yeah.
conversation. She was inspiring there, but was she? Did she make sure you ate good breakfast? And you know, was she a mom type?
No. She was. Well, she was. You know, it was a different day. She was very fortunate. She couldn't cook literally. You know, she cooked a little bit, but she was fortunate and had. We had
Somebody to help.
And I think that was part of it. She had a strong sense that she had been fortunate, and as she said, well, I had my father and a husband and sons, and they've taken care of me, and so I should do civic work.
Yeah.
And so that's she was easy to be around, though. She was an amazing combination of. She had, as you say, tremendous presence, but she didn't talk a lot. She never
wasn't intimidating.
I think that because of everything she did, you know, it sometimes attaches to people.
Yes.
She really did so much that people were a little in awe of her sometimes.
Yeah.
But
well, I would have been. I'll tell you that.
But she was. One time, I remember, she had a very low voice. She kept a low voice, but every so often, my dad would say, "No." She'd get talking about her projects, you know, the conservation, and we got to save this park. And she was she had a very one-track mind. She'd get on these things and had a tendency to consume her.
Yeah. Have you anything there that you'd like to be sure we remember about your mother?
Well, I think that it's funny. I was going to say that some of these traits show up very young, you know.
Like?
That we have a letter from her mother written to some other member of the family, and they were up some resort, and they said, she was talking about mother, and he said, "Dear little Cal," and she was 8 years old, I think, or something. She said she's very generous and patient and persistent.
And those qualities stayed with her all along.
It's amazing.
If your mother were here today, now let me, first of all, when did your mother die?
Oh, it's in the mid-60s.
Mid-60s,
yeah.
And she has been honored now by the Marin Women's Hall of Fame, what, 25 years? 25
years. You know, that's why it's such a moving thing to think that they still remember her after 25 years.
But you don't, your mother's impact will never be lost on Marin County. And
well,
her name will stay there, but still, all these other marvelous things that become a part of our life.
Well, it's true, and I think that conservation is, she used to refer to it as a living memorial, you know, and it is true, this idea was coming in there to save the land, and nothing, I guess, is permanent, but this is pretty permanent, you know, where you save land, and she liked to see the public, everybody using it, see the kids there, and it was, it's a very democratic thing to see this public. She didn't like the idea of people being charged to go into the parks. You know, she thought that
it should be available.
That's right, for the public, right. And of course the reverse is that if the land is shut up, the special places are shut up. Just if private people own everything, then you lose places like Stinson Beach or Taylor Park or Angel Island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If your mother were alive today, what do you think would be something that would be urging her to get back into the fray or to get into the fray?
Well, I think it'd be dependent. You know, if she came back as in her prime.
Yes.
she would be very happy that she was given this award, certainly. But and that would she would appreciate it and spend some time on that. But she'd want to know now, what are the issues now?
Right. What do you think an issue or the issues would be?
Well, see, she worked on the church. She raised 5 sons, and then she really hadn't done much conservation, except her mother was in beautification in the Galveston. I just hadn't prepared to think about.
I'm just wondering, you know, like we worry about traffic and the fact that all along the corridor going through Marin, it seems to be getting more and more cluttered and crowded on the sides. I don't know, but
well, I think that she'd be very interested in what's happening in Yosemite.
Okay.
Now, that's a big issue. She'd be concerned about air pollution and water pollution, very much. She'd be right now. She'd be right in the middle of who is going to be the new head of the state parks under Pete Wilson's administration.
Yes.
You bet your life. She'd be phoning Bill Mott, you know, who as you know was the state park director in National Park. He's over here and working on the Presidio, and they'd be on the phone if all her gang were back.
She'd probably be in the middle of what's going to happen to the Presidio, maybe.
You bet your life.
Yeah.
But I think she'd be interested in these land issues that I mentioned, Yosemite and Tahoe, and she'd probably be interested in Lake Baikal over in Siberia. You know, that's come to the attention of people. 20% of all the unfrozen fresh water in the world is in that lake, and it's being polluted. So she'd be thinking about that and expanding her ideas to other countries. And
yeah, you've just used that word that at least the mental picture came in my mind, that Marin County was a focus for a while, then her obviously would grow, and she would be interested all over the world.
And she would go to meetings all over the country, you know, church meetings, garden meetings, conservation meetings, but she didn't go to Europe or anything like that. That was
she might now.
She would now. Oh yes, because there'd be communication. She'd be right up on communications and telexes. She'd have a telex in her room and be shooting stuff all over, and basically excited about, as I say, about being in the struggle and counting the votes.
Excited and interested. What a fascinating woman, and you talk about her so so lovingly. It's great. And one final little thing for a minute that you want to say about your mother?
Well, no, I think that except that my brothers and I learned a lot from her. We learned a lot from her about not gossiping, you know, saying the good thing about people, you know, and that you can have an adversary today and say, we disagree on this, be very specific, and remain friends.
But when the problem is solved, in whatever direction, then you're friends again.
That's right. Work hard on, like it says in the Bible, when you set your hand to something, work on it with all your might. You know, that's what we learn.